Brands spend a lot of time looking backwards in watchmaking, dwelling on the past. They are horological old men yelling at clouds and smelling of piss. But that's not true of all the brands all the time. Sometimes, while the old men are napping, new notions come out to play. They're few and far between, but in the brief moments they exist, they can be some of the most bonkers things you've ever seen. So here they are, those most ridiculous ideas, laid out for your amusication. Stay to the end for the ultimate cooking hack. If you're a little on the older side yourself, then it's important to keep warm, and what better way to do so than by being humbled and blessed at the same time in this delightful sweater, available in the description below. Thank you. If there's a brand out there that couldn't be more old man if it wore New Balance walking shoes and put 2 spaces after a full stop, it's Frederique Constant. The weird thing here is it's actually relatively young, younger than I am, and yet it's been cosplaying as elderly since the day it was born. I suppose it makes sense, really. The best and most expensive watchmakers really are the oldest of old men, and so the aesthetic comes with a certain credibility that can be quite appealing. So when Frederique Constant slapped us about the chops with the absolutely mental Monolithic, we were all a bit taken aback. Grandad got a new pair of shoes, and it looks like they might be of the Nike Mag self-lacing variety. At the heart of every watch is its escapement, which is most easily understood as a mechanical capacitor. To prevent the big mainspring winding down as fast as it can, the escapement allows just a small amount of energy to be released in discrete repeating increments. The current solution to this particular challenge has been in popular use since 1769, so naturally Frederique Constant thought it was high time to try something else. Every time it's always chicken chow mein and pork fried rice. They wanted to taste the rainbow. In 2001, another watchmaker, Ulysse Nardin, we will be hearing more from them later on, wondered if computer chips might make a good material for watchmaking. And it turned out that yes they do. Not only can silicon be used to replace existing components in a standard escapement, being lightweight, almost friction-free and anti-magnetic, the ability to make highly complex elastic structures with it as well opened up the door to some properly out there thinking. Case in point, this Frederique Constant Monolithic. Where a standard escapement pauses the mainspring's unwinding 28,800 times per hour, Freddie C figured it was possible to up that by a factor of 10 by growing silicon into a compliant mechanism. Yes, where silicone makes things grow, silicon is grown layer by layer for an atomically perfect construction. And that means it can be formed into crazy contraptions like this, Vija's mixtape. Combining both the balance wheel and pallet fork of a traditional escapement, and with 2 adjustable weights either side to dial it all in, the Monolith buzzes like a wasp with an Uzi, the alien structure flexing at 8 predetermined points, each thinner than one of the thinning hairs on my thinning head. And that's just the beginning. As we'll continue to see, the combination of silicon's precision plus the recent ability to model complex compliant mechanisms in simulation makes for some very interesting creations indeed. But why would anyone except Skrillex want those controlled beats going so much faster? Enter the oldest of old man watchmakers, Breguet, to offer up an answer. Back in the good old days of pre-industry and diphtheria, watches, like the ones Breguet done made, used to beat slowly, since the metal alloys used for the mainsprings back then wasn't up to the task of lasting long enough. We've all been there. Whilst 28,800 beats per hour is today pretty commonplace, pocket watches of the 18th and 19th century ran at anywhere from 18,000 beats per hour all the way as low as 14,400. The clever sausages in the room will have noticed those are all divisible by 3,600, the number of seconds in an hour, offering up from 4 beats per second to 8 for the modern day watches. This frequency can also be measured in hertz, which is read as half the beats per second, since the escapement only achieves a full cycle every 2 beats. So, crotchety old man Breguet, when not shooing the neighbour kids off his lawn, he spent time pondering the exact nature of watchmaking and the topics thereof, and frequency was one of those topics. If you've ever learnt to ride a bicycle, you'll understand intuitively that the faster you go, the more stable you become. And the same is true of a watch's balance wheel. Go slowly and one small bump and it'll be knocked off its axle, and then it's grazed knees and tears all round. Breguet partially solved the problem with his parachute shock absorber system, a springy dingle that absorbed bumps up through the axle, but that only got him so far. It stopped the balance wheel breaking, but didn't stop it, well, stopping. For that, he needed to channel his inner Jeremy Clarkson to summon more speed and more power. In a watch built in 1808 for King George III, Breguet whipped up a rocket ship that packed in a thicker mainspring for a blazing 21,600 beats per hour, 6 beats per second, or 3 hertz. And whilst actual old man Breguet is now keeping the worms company, the business has continued to pursue the goal of increased stability, using a methodology even science doesn't truly understand. The healing power of crystals, the magnetic force of, magnets. You see, not all of that juicy power from the mainspring actually makes it through the movement, because much of it gets eaten up by greedy friction. When a watch is measured on a timing machine, amplitude, the total angle of the balance wheel's rotation, determines how much of that power is actually making it all the way through, with friction along the way from the various wheels within it, and its complications, sapping it a bit at a time. It's like a brain teaser for watchmakers, trying to achieve what they want without using up all that precious amplitude. One of the biggest culprits in this friction sink is the balance wheel itself, and so Breguet, for the classic Chronométrie 772-710 Hz, which runs at a whopping 20 beats per second, chose to suspend it with magnets instead of seating it in typical jewel bearings. One side touches the magnet with just the tip, whilst the other side is completely free-floating, which also provides additional shock resistance. But wait a magnetic attraction minute! Aren't magnets supposed to be the sworn enemy of watchmaking, binding delicate parts together such that you must take time out of your day to visit your local watchmaker and have it demagnetized? Ordinarily, yes, but Breguet wriggled free of that particular sticking point by equipping the watch with an anti-magnetic silicon escapement, including hairspring. The old dog's learnt a few new tricks. If you were to think off the tippy top of your head which watchmakers waged the technological war closest to the bleeding edge, it probably wouldn't be Patek Philippe you'd think of, except these wily coyotes have been around the block long enough to know a crate full of Acme quartz when they see it. Preserving a company like Patek Philippe inherently means experimenting with future tech, if anything as an insurance policy, with the famous watchmaker's history dotted with unexpected creations like electronic clocks, quartz watches, and, just in case, a lifelike painting of a tunnel. The great irony is that its electronic master clock operation, which furnished the likes of TV stations and airports with pinpoint accurate timekeeping, was the part that ended up obsolete as GPS timing took over. But plucky Patek Philippe didn't give up, and in 2005 began its advanced research program to investigate modern materials and techniques, starting with the material silicon to eventually create a full escapement out of the stuff, inclusive of the pallet fork, escape wheel, balance and hairspring, everything. The Aquanaut Travel Time Advanced Research 5650G upped the game with the inclusion of Patek's most complex advancement yet, a compliant mechanism reducing the component count in the travel time pusher mechanism by over 3 times. Except this time, it wasn't in silicon. The problem, as Patek Philippe saw it, with silicon was that it could not be hand-finished in the same way steel could. So they decided to make a complex, highly intricate component ideal for silicon out of steel instead, just so they could make it look real pretty. This is one of the best examples of the oxymoronic nature of modern watchmaking, introducing innovative new ways to do something as outdated as the medicine at the back of the cabinet. And the more we look at this particular innovation, the more head-scratching it becomes. What at first looks like a simple single layer turns out to be 2, with 4 skinny angled blades crossed by mirrored versions on the layer below. They're entirely separate of each other, flexing to allow the transmission of movement from the pusher to the mechanism, leaving a gap between them of just 150 microns. You couldn't floss it with a pube, and I wouldn't suggest trying. How Patek Philippe achieved this is still something of a mystery, the company not delivering on its secrets. There's speculation it's EDM. Put down the molly, that means electrical discharge machining. But that process uses a wire, and so the complex overlapping shapes wouldn't be possible. Perhaps they're 3D printed, or layered, or perhaps Thierry Stern is a robot from the future where squares have been banned, and he's been sent back in time to put it right. The pursuit of precision is the scourge of any watch brand worth its wind, a constant battle to compare itself to the unrealistic standards of a cheap $10 quartz. Chasing this new paradigm achieved by such lowly means could drive a watchmaker mad, and that's why Urwerk took the "F it, you do it then" approach to high horology and created the EMC. Built inside this 80-hour power reserve caliber isn't just a watch movement, but an electronic companion as well, a digital nanny keeping tabs on its horological responsibility, giving it the appropriate title Electromechanical Control, or EMC. Think of it like a probation ankle tag, but for mechanical accuracy. Press a button on the side and the dial that isn't the seconds, hours or minutes, or power reserve will spring into action, reading out the current accuracy of the watch to within plus or minus 20 seconds per day. Behind the scenes, an optical sensor reads the RCAP balance, RCAP being an alloy developed for high-precision machining typically required in scientific applications, and compares it to, yes, a built-in quartz movement, powered by the same twin-barrel mainsprings winding the rest of the watch. I'm not sure which is more ridiculous in this watch, how the power is wound into those mainsprings or how it is converted into electrical energy, so I'll just tell you, a fat crank handle on the right hand side of the watch, like what they used to start up old-timey cars with, is how the power is delivered. How the power is converted, that's via a micro-rotor generator provided by Maxon, the same dudes who gave not only the Mars Perseverance rover its motors, but the Ingenuity helicopter as well, the first to fly on an alien world. What of all this technology though, if just to tell you your watch is keeping shit time? Seems kinda pointless. So Urwerk added one last feature to the EMC, what is perhaps the largest crack in the watchmaker's sanity, a screw. It's usually a screw that's only accessible to the watchmaker regulating the watch, but now it's available to you as well. Twist it one way or t'other and the watch will beat faster or slower, with the net result of its user's inevitable ham-fisted fuckwittery proudly displayed dial side for all to see. If I were to hold a Bergeron strap-changing tool to your temple, one of the cheap, scratchy ones, and ask you to pick the least innovative old man watch brand you could think of, perhaps you'd come to the conclusion that the grumpy Frenchman Cartier is indeed that candidate. In terms of design, they charge ahead of the rest of the pack, producing shapes at varying degrees of viscosity. But when it comes to watchmaking innovation, they pretty much take a back seat and let everyone else do the talking. Or do they? There was of course the recent Mass Mysterious, with the only thing more challenging to understand than its spinning self-contained movement, the spelling of its name. However, in terms of innovation, that was more a new idea using existing knowledge. I'm looking for the stuff they put together in a clean room, in hazmat suits, and keep in the fridge next to the smallpox. And lo and behold, Cartier did indeed oblige with the ID Concept series, 2 watches designed to imagine what watchmaking might have been like if watchmakers spent more effort innovating than cultivating waitlists and courting Timothée Chalamet. The first watch, the ID One, was drier than a nun's chuff, on purpose, requiring 0 lubrication whatsoever to operate. Modern synthetic oils last a very long time, but back in the day, natural oils had a nasty habit of breaking down and turning sludgy, which is why watches needed servicing more often back then. The ID One imagined a world where gears could bump and grind together free of the slippery stuff, and this was achieved through the use of carbon crystal. Hang on a second, isn't the crystalline form of carbon normally called diamond? Yes, and that's what Cartier used for the balance wheel, escapement, bridges, and almost the entire gear train. Not only does diamond not require lubrication, it can also be artificially produced using deep reactive ion etching, which you don't need a degree in rocket surgery to appreciate is very, very precise. Which also meant the watch needs no calibration either, no fiddling with the regulation to get it bang on. Slap it together, dry as a bone, and it spits out timing graphs that'll give a quartz crystal cause to take out life insurance. That's already a pretty spiffing endorsement of Cartier's watchmaking capabilities, but there's little point in calling a watch ID One if there's no intention to make an ID Two, which Cartier did. Building on the concept of imperious efficiency, the nerdlingers at Cartier HQ wondered if this thinking could be interpolated from the long-term operation of the watch and into its day-to-day usage. After all, if a watch is no longer getting bogged down by friction, it should be able to keep on running like Forrest Gump with a Duracell up his butt. So for the ID Two, Cartier kept the carbon crystal escapement, which was friction-free and lightweight, and added 2 stonking great barrels filled to bursting with fiberglass mainsprings, 2 per barrel for 4 total. Why fiberglass? With a polymer coating, they're also frictionless and require no oil, thus extracting more energy from them, not to mention the incredible ability of fiberglass to store elastic energy. That's why it's used in pole vault poles and Lotus cars, where one is only expected to move a person a few feet down the track before being abandoned, and the other is a pole vault pole. The power from these mainsprings is so high that a planetary gearing system in diamond-coated silicon was created to spread the load over more teeth and stop the whole thing going bang like a lightly used K-series. But there was more performance yet to be extracted, not in the movement itself, but in the everything else within the case: air. Yes, Cartier sucked that case like they owed it money, leaving it all but 0.02% free of the life-giving gas. That clear ceramic case back isn't glued into place. That vacuum is holding it there. How much did Cartier manage to eke out the power reserve? 10 days? 15? 20 even? A whopping 32. Perfect for covering any month with a day left over. Although useless in 46 BC when Caesar temporarily added the 33-day month undecember and the 34-day month duodecember. Checkmate, Cartier. To my Patreons, for your support and wisdom, I thank you. We've had some good times. I especially love that... well, I can't really say here. If you're not a part of the Patreon gang and you want to join our daily tomfoolery, you'll find a link in the description below. Once upon a long time ago, in the year of our Lord 1916, Tag Heuer created a watch, the Mikrograph, that could record times down to an accuracy of 1/100th of a second. Even today, that's pretty impressive, with 1/100th of a second being even faster than the time it would take me to accept a stainless steel Daytona allocation at retail. For reference, the speedy end of a human blink is about 1/10th of a second, and this is 10 times quicker than that. So to celebrate this valuable memory, Tag Heuer thought it would be neat to raise the bar just a little bit and create a watch capable of measuring 1/10th of a honeybee's wing flap. That's 1/2000th of a second. They'd already cracked 1/1000th of a second, but doubling that accuracy proved to be even more of a mountainous technical challenge. If you're familiar with Formula 1, then it's like the limitations of valve springs in reaching higher RPMs. They simply can't operate fast enough. If you're not into Formula 1, then first, boo, and second, at certain speeds, springs just can't physically coil and uncoil fast enough. In Formula 1, pneumatic valve springs were introduced, air-inflated bellows replacing traditional metal-coiled springs that allowed engine speeds up to 20,000 RPM. For the Tag Heuer Mikrogirder, a similar level of lateral thinking needed to be applied, and this part will blow your mind a little bit, to measure speeds almost 10 times faster than those screaming V10s. And so the story goes, a Tag Heuer engineer was sat at home trying to think of a way to overcome the physical limitations of the balance spring, when his contemplative streak was rudely broken by the twang 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 of his young child flicking the sprung doorstop. It was his eureka moment. Or it would have been if it were actually true. Still, the sprung doorstop analogy is the perfect way to visualize how the problem was solved. When you twang one of those suckers, not only does it fill you with childish glee, it also returns to dead center and even overextends in the merest wisp of a flea's hiccup, bouncing back and forth over and over like some kind of fast, repeatable oscillator. And that's exactly what the Mikrogirder is, a linear oscillator that twangs back and forth 7.2 million times per hour. At that rate, the large chronograph hand circles the entire dial 20 times every single second, which, if you can't imagine it, is like sticking the hand on the end of a drill and then squeezing the trigger. Now, you may have also seen a Tag Heuer proudly displaying 10,000 at the top of the dial and be wondering how they broke the 10,000th of a second barrier. But that is in fact a completely different innovation from the house of Tag Heuer known as lying. It's the same 2,000th of a second movement rebadged as 5/10,000th of a second instead. If you're enjoying the video, it makes a huge difference to me if you can like, leave a comment, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. It's how YouTube knows you like it, so it'll then show it to more people. Thank you. At the beginning, I told you we were going to come back to Ulysse Nardin, and that we shall, because although technological development existed with metal alloys long before little Ulysse was even potty trained, I do think that the watchmaker spurred what has since become the modern renaissance of material technology in watchmaking. To really understand it, I think it requires, in true me fashion, some long, rambling context. As I'm sure it's painfully obvious to anyone who's accidentally stumbled in here from the modern world, all of these solutions have been solved by computers, and that friction, power reserve, lightness, and precision are all antiquated challenges that the rest of the world has long since moved on from. There's more advanced management of physics in Rocket League than there is in the entirety of Patek Philippe's advanced research collection. But nevertheless, it continues to be done because not everything needs a reason beyond, I wonder if we can, and that's where the origins of silicon in watchmaking really emerge. When electronics had signed an eviction notice on mechanical watches, it was a scramble to see if this trade could be repurposed in any other way, or perhaps appreciated on a different level. Ulysse Nardin's Rolf Schneider, who performed business CPR on it as it teetered on death's door, subscribed to the emerging idea that mechanical watchmaking could evolve to become an artisanal appreciation rather than a practical one, and he wanted to get ahead and usher in that era with a bang on the scale of the universe. A big bang, so to speak. He originally had the idea of bringing back Ulysse Nardin with something impressive like a minute repeater, but when he went to visit his friend and genius watchmaker Jörg Spöring, he was struck by the astronomical clock hanging on the wall. That was it. He wanted the entire night sky on the wrist, the most complicated astronomical wristwatch ever made. Jörg promptly informed him that the clock was not the work of his own hand, but his apprentice, who had decided to spread his wings a bit by offering to fix the Vatican's astronomical clock, which had been broken for centuries, with almost no experience, and despite the clock being deemed unfixable by many masters before it. Rolf set off to Italy to find this overconfident apprentice, to discover that he had indeed brought the clock to working operation. By taking the clock entirely apart, the apprentice had come to understand it and was able to reassemble it successfully and didn't even have an extra part left over at the end. Rolf asked the apprentice if he would build him an astronomical wristwatch. The apprentice was confused. Why have the incredible accuracy of an astronomical clock and indeed the universe in a watch too small to read it? Rolf assured him that, for the buyers of this kind of watch, that wouldn't be an issue. And that little boy who fixed the Vatican clock grew up to be Ludwig Oechlin. Ludwig actually had plans of his own, namely a design that fixed the stability issues of Breguet's failed natural escapement, which is a bit like asking Stephen Curry if he wants to see some real b-ball, then punting him in the tackle. Rolf had just the ticket, an award-winning idea developed by fellow Ulysse Nardin watchmaker Carol Forestier-Casapi, who would go on to lead watchmaking development at brands like Cartier and Tag Heuer. The concept was simple in idea but almost impossible in execution. Instead of just rotating the hands, why not the entire movement as well? Turning this idea into a reality proved to be a colossal challenge, and so Ludwig's help was enlisted on the promise he could include his new escapement. The problems with the concept were ironed out, with Ludwig bringing further development to turn this fun but functionless complication into the driving force behind the actual timekeeping. But there was another challenge. Ludwig's escapement didn't actually work. They could have abandoned it and chucked in a normal escapement and released the watch like that, but Ludwig was set. A watch this freakishly weird needed an even more freakish escapement to go with it. There was an answer, it was simply as yet undiscovered, that is until Ulysse Nardin industrial manager Pierre Gigax was tasked with finding it. The problem, it seemed, was that the metal alloys usually used in an escapement were just too heavy. They tried aluminium, but it was too soft. They tried cheese, but the watchmakers kept eating it. The solution needed a non-watchmaking brand to come up with, and Pierre found it canvassing the local technical schools in a desperate hope for an answer. Why not silicon, was the engineer's suggestion. Well, first, its production is incredibly complex and technical and scientific and bears no resemblance to traditional watchmaking. And second, did you not just hear the first reason? It's basically a non-starter. But in theory, it is the perfect material. Incredibly precise, impossibly smooth and friction-free, very hard and rugged, anti-magnetic, can be formed into complex shapes, and is even elastic in the right configuration. So Rolf said the Swiss watchmaking equivalent of it, and this utterly bizarre material choice found its way into this utterly bizarre watch, the Ulysse Nardin Freak. That ultimately required not just the investment in the material, but its manufacture as well. And today, Ulysse Nardin, a manufacturer of less than 10,000 watches per year, owns its own silicon factory. That's like a car company having a space rocket division. And that's the end of that story. Except it's not, because when you've got a silicon factory, you're gonna go and make some silicon. With the Freak Inner Vision, Ulysse Nardin asked the question, can it silicon? And attempted to replace everything that wasn't nailed down inside the Freak with silicon. The escapement was silicon, of course. The hairspring was silicon. The balance shock was silicon. The barrel bearings were silicon, and even the bridges were silicon, completely removing the need for jewels and oiling. You can tell this was made by the smartest minds in watchmaking because it didn't even occur to them that it looks like a big purple donger. Even today, the Freak's journey continues with the ongoing experiment that is the Freak Next. 4 layers of silicon split into 32 compliant blades for a frequency of 12 Hz or 86,400 beats per hour over a 70-hour power reserve. It's as bonkers an idea as it is to look at, and yet we're back to our first watch, the Frederique Constant Monolithic, that surpasses it for beat rate and power reserve, and for the price of a Tudor Black Bay chrono. Only a few years of development separate the prophetic Freak Next and the younger Monolithic, a rapidly ramping Moore's law of horology started by the original 2001 Freak. I don't know about you, but I, for one, am excited to see where it goes next. In the meantime, while we wait, as promised, if you want to spice up your cooking, I thoroughly recommend the addition of MSG. I know, but it really rounds out the flavour. Alternatively, looking at an awesome watch while you eat, that makes any meal a Michelin star. See you next time.